Hello and welcome back to Dream Girl. We're now in season 2 and I am so excited to welcome Anna Malaika Tubbs today. So Anna is the author of Three Mothers, this wonderful book that we're going to deep dive into in a minute. So it's about how the mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X and James Baldwin shaped a nation. Anna is also a Cambridge PhD candidate in sociology and a Bill and Melinda Gates Cambridge Scholar. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Stanford University with a BA in anthropology, Anna received a master's from the University of Cambridge in multidisciplinary gender studies. Outside of all of this wonderful work, she's also an educator and diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. Hello, Anna. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about our conversation.
Me too. I've honestly read so much about you and watched all of your videos. I feel like I know you already. Do you get this a lot from people?
No, I love it. I mean, that's such like a compliment, to arrive at a place where people are like, I've watched so much about you.
Yeah.
There's information out there. So I really appreciate it. Hopefully I don't bore you by repeating any answers.
Trust me. It's just it feels like talking to a celebrity, right? You already know anything like a little creep and then you just pretend that you don't. But so tell us, Anna, walk us through the journey. What's life been like for you?
Life has been crazy this week and the last 2 weeks really, because we moved from Stockton to Los Angeles, and we being my husband, my kiddo and I, and my child is a 17-month-old ball of energy. He's incredible. But it's just really hard to move when you have a toddler. And then I'm also pregnant, expecting another baby in August. Thank you. So there's just a lot of combinations of things that I would not recommend to people. Like, I don't recommend moving when you're pregnant. It's
in a
exhausting.
pandemic.
I don't recommend moving. Yeah, when you have a toddler, it's a lot. I don't recommend moving when you're in the middle of a virtual book tour. Because half the time you're like, oh my goodness, you're unpacking, and then all of a sudden it's like, I have an event now, and I look crazy. But we're making it work.
I can imagine. This is incredible. Like, I was meant to move to Oxford as well for my new job since January. And I've told them I'm not moving before summer because no one wants to do this.
Because is it all virtual anyways right now?
Yeah, everyone is working remotely.
Yeah, I agree. Like, there's no need to move until,
Absolutely.
I completely agree.
But tell us, Anna, walk us from school. What was Anna like in school?
Oh gosh, in what part of school? My PhD school?
Oh, we're
or
talking
younger?
real school.
Like high school?
Like a kid's Anna.
It's funny because throughout my life, I've kind of been not a different person. Like, it's just been like an evolving process depending on where I live, because I moved so many times growing up. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but only lived there for 2 years before my family went abroad. My parents wanted to give us this kind of global experience, and so they took temporary teaching positions abroad so that we could travel with them. And that was my older sister, older brother, and myself. And so we were in Dubai for 4 years, and then in Estonia for 1 year, in Sweden for several months, and then in Mexico for 4 years, in Azerbaijan, and then we were in Laramie, Wyoming when we came back to the United States. I went to boarding school in Indiana for 2 years before I went to Stanford, and then the Cambridge journey after that. And so because I've moved so many times, when you're the new girl, in many ways you're still very much yourself. Like, I am always that very confident, excited to talk to anybody kind of person, because I had to be. I was always thrown in these situations where my parents, they didn't really care that it could be kind of difficult for their kids. Instead, it was just like, this is an opportunity. So we lived in Mexico. They put us in an all Spanish speaking school, and we didn't speak a word of the language. Right. Like, that's how my parents did things. And so within a month, I'm speaking and dreaming and thinking in Spanish, because you're just kind of like forced to do this. And when you're young, you pick up on things so much faster, So I was always this kid that was just really, although I was nervous with that angst that you have as a student when you're young, it was also kind of this forced confidence, because I wanted to find my friends and I wanted to find my new place and figure it all out and learn. And then it took me a while to embrace the fact that I could kind of continue to bring all of these places with me. When you're younger, it feels much more like I need to adapt to where I am right now. And I just want to blend in. I don't want to be the kid who speaks some other language. I want to, be like everybody else. And now I'm like, gosh, I wish I'd held on to more of the things I knew of the places before, because it would be really cool to be multilingual. And at some point I spoke all of these different languages, but every time we moved, I kind of dropped one of them. So in some ways, my identity has stayed very much the same. And in other ways, I've embraced parts of it that when you're younger, you just don't see it as being as cool as they really are.
Absolutely. This is such a great point. Like, I've been having this conversation so often now, where people who have had incredibly interesting life experiences, where they come from a different country, born in a different country, raised in a different country, but when you're young you think it's a problem because you're different, and you just want to get rid of all of this. But this is just the richness of our personalities, and obviously for you this has reflected so nicely in who you are now, right? And so another question I have for you based on what you just said is, this is a question I usually get and I don't know how to answer, so I'm hoping you're going to help me with this. When people ask you, why are you so confident and how can someone else learn from this, what do you say?
Oh gosh, I actually have been asked that recently a lot. A lot of people have been saying, like, you have such a strong sense of self, and like, how did you develop that? So interesting. I mean, again, in retrospect, you're like, I don't know when that happened. I definitely remember having those nerves and feeling worried, even when you go to college and like, like, I cried the first day that I started undergrad. I was like, I'm so nervous. Like, what if nobody likes me?
Oh, yeah. What if I have no friends?
What if I have no friends? And my mom and dad were so confused because they were like, you've moved so many times in your life. This is just another move. It shouldn't feel, it shouldn't feel any different. But for some reason it did. So I think for me, really, that confidence, at some point I realized I don't know, that I really did have a lot to offer, that I was a cool person, that I invested in myself every year and thought about how can I be a nicer person and how can I give more. And I'm always really reflective on, did I handle that situation in the best way possible? Or hopefully that person, sees me in my kind of my true sense, and I represent myself well. And if I don't, I learn from that experience and I try to continuously kind of evolve, which I think allows somebody to be confident that you also are forgiving of yourself. It's not this sense of you're in this kind of stagnant state and any mistake you make is always gonna, haunt you, or if you were kind of rude to somebody by accident, that you can't get past that. There's like a moment in your mind where you have to also be able to forgive yourself and accept yourself in the evolving state that we are all in. And I think that's allowed me to be a lot more confident. I think when you're younger, you're so focused on every little thing, like, oh no, I wore the wrong thing, or said the wrong thing, or I did this really embarrassing thing. And you start to hopefully grow out of that, where by the next day you're sort of just accepting that something might have happened, not the way you would have wanted it to go, and you're learning from it. So I think that's where my confidence comes from. It's a general acceptance of my flaws as well as my strengths, and being okay with those things evolving and growing over time.
Absolutely. It's just a journey, right?
What about you? What do you say when people ask you that?
So it always catches me off guard because it's not something you think about actively. So then when someone asks it, I'm always a bit like, oh, I don't know. And I don't want to sound like this annoying person who just says, ugh, I'm just like this, So it's just like, okay.
I've just always been like this. I can't teach you.
Born like this. But yeah, it's very much the same thing in terms of, it's knowing your self-worth, which then leads on to you accepting yourself for who you are and being comfortable with who you are. Therefore, this comes across as confidence, right? Because you're not trying to be someone else and you just seem very cool. And I think that's my answer, is that it was a journey to self-acceptance. We've all been teenagers. We've all struggled with who we are. But it doesn't mean that there are not times where I still feel a bit fake, when you're doing something. It's a bit, even basic adulting things. Sometimes I feel like, why am I doing this? And I'm like, you're a bit old now, it's normal, but you still feel that disconnect because you don't think that you are at that level. So I think it's pretty much the same thing of, it was a journey of understanding that, you are worthy of, everything that is happening to you. It's not by accident. You're not here by
Yeah.
accident. So just own it and enjoy it. So I think that's basically it. And I think it can be an annoying piece of advice because it doesn't help anybody because it's just like, you'll get there. But yeah, no, that
I think it's helpful for people though to see that it's not like you're saying it's part of something larger than yourself. Like in
absolutely.
order for you to be confident, you're also aware that it's affecting people around
Hmm.
you and you're confident. And I think when people realize it's not just like a selfish thing to be
Hmm.
confident, that you also feel like everybody feels more confident when they're around confident
Hmm.
people. I
Yeah,
think like confident people who aren't trying to tear other people
absolutely.
down. So actually authentically
Yeah.
confident, not putting on this kind of posture or performance of confidence and breaking
Hmm.
others as you go, but thinking of how you uplift
Hmm.
others. I think people who are truly confident really do that. And that's why so many people might ask you that question. Being around you, they feel happy, they feel excited, it's contagious, so they want to know. And I think when we make it about something more than just
Hmm.
us, then people see it being as less of a selfish journey and more of a, oh, it's good for me and good for others around
Hmm.
me if I feel good about myself.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. I feel like this has been helpful. I should take notes. This is definitely what I'm going to say from now on. But another thing that we have in common is the fact that we've both studied at Cambridge. And one question I had for you, because you're obviously a young woman who is a black woman as well. And how was your experience of, how these things are dealt with, especially when we're talking a bit more about the negative side of racism when you are
Yeah.
in England as compared to America? Because I hear a lot of people comparing these and saying how in the UK, people are so polite that they refuse to address things and they would rather brush it under the carpet, but you are called out a lot more in the US. Did you feel that this is the case?
It was so interesting because when I was at Stanford, I was very involved with like our activist community, our communities of color. I was president of our Black Student Union, etc. And then when I went to Cambridge for my master's first, and then later for my PhD, so there's two different. Oh, sorry, coughing. Let me start that one over. There's two different experiences that I had when I did my master's versus my
Hmm.
PhD, because even for me, my own development of understanding the way the UK versus the US worked with conversations around race and gender and
Hmm.
intersectionality. When I was in Cambridge for my master's, this was around the same time that Trayvon Martin's
Hmm.
murderer was acquitted, so that he didn't have
Hmm.
any, consequences, etc. And that's when became a very stark reality for
Hmm.
me that there wasn't that same community that I used to have as an undergrad of who I organized with and other people who were all upset
Hmm.
that it was clearly something we were speaking about. And in the UK, it just felt kind of silent. It felt like nothing was really talked
Hmm.
about except for a criticism a little bit of the United
Mm.
States,
Yeah.
like it's so crazy in the US
Yeah.
that must be so bad. But I also am walking through Cambridge very visibly as like one of the only people of color there, and them not having any understanding that this is an issue that is pervasive there as
Hmm.
well. And often you always hear in the UK, this is more of a class issue than a race issue. And again, a lack of understanding of how interconnected and inextricable those things are from each other. If it's just a class issue, then there would be, it's all just related. The fact that people can say it's one or the other is very confusing to me, and that's very much the focus in the
Hmm.
UK. And then when I came back from my PhD, so this was, 2 years after I finished my master's, and I knew going into it a little bit more about the mentality. But they had started these conversations around decolonizing the curriculum and decolonizing Cambridge. So this was kind of a newer
Hmm.
conversation, but it was shocking to me because these are conversations that American universities had in like the
Right?
60s.
It's a bit
Like
late.
this is a very it's like so far behind, and I'm proud to be an alumna of Cambridge. I love our school, but there are definitely moments where you're just sort of shocked. I couldn't believe that there were even events that the title was, should we decolonize the curriculum? Should we? I what
Who's
That just seems like
arguing
a
the other
waste of
side
time.
here?
Why are we going to spend an hour talking about should
Mm.
we when we should be just moving on to how do
How? Yeah.
you? And yeah, what are the steps for that? So that was really exhausting for me, honestly. By the time I was starting my PhD, I wasn't in the same mindset as I was as an undergrad or even as a master's student, where I was there and ready to change the institution or, join others in this fight against this institution and how race was operating there, because I was much focused on larger, what can my work do for the world? What can I do to change things? And so I was definitely less involved and felt very kind of this like almost visceral reaction to this question, should we decolonize? And it just made me feel very, I need to just focus on getting my work done and getting out of here kind of thing. And some of my friends who were much more focused or were newer to Cambridge, who came just for their PhD, wanted to get more involved in these conversations. And I was very kind of, it would have seemed probably confusing to those who know me well that I was trying my best to stay uninvolved in it, because there's just so much work left to do at Cambridge. And it's just a lot. It's a lot of pressure to be a Black woman at Cambridge in any capacity. My supervisor, Monica Moreno Figueroa, who is wonderful, she has so much pressure on her shoulders because she's a Black Latina woman and everybody wants to come to her all the time for the answers. And it's just something I refuse to do. I was going to just do my work and kind of leave, to be honest, if I have to admit that.
But that kind of breaks my heart, because, the fact that it is so emotionally draining, right? And you feel like every time people come to you and expect you to either educate them or direct them to something, and you think in today's time where you can Google everything, why do I have to educate you? It's just exhausting. I'm the victim of the system. Why do I need to educate you about this? Like, go figure it out. Right?
Yeah, you go figure it out on your own time. I don't have time to do this. I'm trying to get a degree.
That's basically it. And I think it's terrible, because this is the experience of a lot of people in both Oxford and Cambridge. And I did my undergrad at Oxford, and you must have heard about this, that they have those statues of those people who used to be slave owners and stuff, and it's still there. And the question that whether these should be taken down is just terrible. Why are you doing this to the people who feel so victimized by this? What's the point? Like, this person is dead. Like, they can't come back and say, why did you take down my statue? Just take it down. And it's just, and then it creates this feeling of, I just want to get out of here. It's a great institution. It's good for my education. I'm going to do it and get out of here. But why are you creating this environment that's toxic for people who bring so much to your institution?
And would continue to bring more if they had that kind of relationship where they felt, seen and they felt respected during their time there. I think one of the ways that I avoided some of the kind of feeling of, being discriminated against, or which is definitely very real, but I didn't feel it all that much when I was there because I was avoiding being involved in things, because I just literally did not have the energy to be in conversation with somebody who might say, should we decolonize? No, I don't, I don't have time.
This is just, no.
I don't have time. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think that more universities who are going through these transitions, if they realize that the more involved you allow people to be, and not in a way where they put pressure on us, not in a way where they say, educate me, but instead say, we are fully committed to this, that we're not even going to question the fact that there should be statues of slave owners here. We're going to take those down. That even as alumni, you give more to that institution, you believe more in that institution, versus in my mind, it's sort of like, Cambridge is what it is. And I'm not sure when they're ever going to change. I personally don't feel involved in that change beyond what I did with my own work, which is claiming within sociology that it's okay to have a project that speaks to people beyond the walls of the institution and beyond the ivory tower, and including writers who are not necessarily, Marx and Weber, but thinking about Audre Lorde and Patricia Hill Collins and Melissa Harris Perry and all these Black women, and even those who are not academics, and including them in my project as legitimate sources. I do hope that inspires some change for the department in terms of accepting those projects and being much more inclusive of voices. But beyond that, I don't have an investment
Yeah.
as in the same way that I do in my undergrad.
Exactly, because you don't have that 100% sense of belongingness, right? Because you always felt a little bit left out. So then obviously
Yeah.
moving on, the gap just grows, and then you just don't want to be involved that much. And that's the
Yeah.
difference, right? Between saying we need representation and we support representation, because just having this random conversation doesn't lead to change. If you want to actually make the change, then you need to support the movement by actually putting it into action and showing people that you're putting it into action.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's unfortunate. And
Unfortunately, right now they're kind of stuck in the stage of here's a platform where we want to hear you speak about your issues. And then as soon as somebody does, there's no action taken. It's more hurtful, actually, because they say, you invited me to speak. And again, many of my friends did speak, did say something, and then were met with very antagonistic responses of, well, you know, here's the reason why, and excuses. And it's like, you're clearly not ready to do this work. Yeah. It's unfortunate.
That's the thing, right? You think that we have come a long way, but at the same time, you then realize that, well, there's still a long way to go. But here we are. On to better things, you know. Your book. Okay, so I've read it in 3 days.
Wow, that is maybe a record. You beat my mom.
Yeah, I read it in 3 days. And just because I really like it when, you know, there is a lot of, I love the way you intertwine the 3 stories every time and just showed the similarities and the differences. And I thought that was very powerful. But my favorite part of the book, I have to say, is your table of content. Like, it really stuck to me when I bought it, because it goes in, I love order, and it's such a great order, right? You start with birth, and then you go through our existence, and then marriage, and then you go through children, and then basically ending with death. And then after death, what happens to our existence, whether it's erased or not. But also there is a very strong emphasis on our in everything that you put. And I thought this is such a strong message. What was your thinking behind with this?
Oh, I appreciate you picking up on all of that. And it's so funny. I was doing an interview where somebody said, did you purposely, like, did you read the table of contents, so, you know, like from start to finish at any point? And it's so funny. It seems like an obvious thing to do, but I hadn't done it. I was so focused on the individual chapters and just what I was trying to accomplish and whatever, that it really does tell a beautiful narrative when you just read the table of contents. So I find that it's cool when people, I was always very excited about the fact that once people hold your book, they're going to notice things that you didn't even intend, and it's amazing. So that is an example of something that I wasn't, like, obviously I kind of planned with the titles, but not how it tells this really beautiful story just on one page. So that's cool. Cool moment that I had that I didn't intend. But in terms of the hour and saying and putting all of us into it, the reader, and saying this is our story, it was, for me, very specifically for Black women and women of color to say, this is our moment to be seen and celebrated and recognized in our wholeness. There are not many books where I think we're seen in our complexity, where it's, you know, we're both happy and we have pain, and we have, you know, people have tried to victimize us, and we've found ways to conquer those realities. But we've also had moments where tragedy has hit, and we've also had moments where we've found ways to survive. So there's just this balance in our identity. And I wanted to make sure that we felt very connected to that and to them. And I also just think it's very emotional when you put yourself in the shoes of these women, that we're not separated from them in that way. These are our experiences. So it was both a celebration as well as an invitation to readers to say, go on this journey with them, experience those highs and those lows. And I think when people have more of a human connection, there's just a lot more that we can do and understand when it comes to even policy conversation, or, you know, a lot of current debates that are happening, not only in the US, but abroad, around how we treat women of color, how we think about motherhood. If we are connected to it, then there's more that we feel willing to do, I think.
Absolutely. So tell me, when did the idea struck? Like, when did you decide, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to write this book?
It's so crazy, the journey, because I think maybe for some writers there's a moment, you know, like where they had a dream or something and they're like, that's the book. I'm going to write that book. That wasn't really for me. It was like multiple steps to get to, okay, here's the book. I found it. When I started my PhD, and I've said this a lot in different interviews, so this is what you've definitely heard, but in terms of addressing the erasure of Black women's stories, I wanted to address erasure. I loved Margot Lee Shetterly's Hidden Figures that inspired the book or the movie. And I knew that I just wanted to be somebody who found other hidden figures, because when you introduce new stories that we should have known all along, it is so inspiring. It's this moment of just questioning why we didn't know this person already, but also you feel inspired and you're just excited to learn more about them. And so that was the work that I knew I wanted to do when I started the PhD. But I went through several different ideas because unfortunately so many Black women's stories are erased. They are forgotten. They're intentionally hidden. And I was like, okay, I obviously need to narrow this down. And actually, even when I was in my Gates interview, my original idea was it was going to be something around like teaching practices, because I started in the Department of Education, and then I transferred later to sociology because it just fit a little bit better when I had a better understanding of what I wanted to do. But my committee said, you know, it's a little broad right now. You know, you want to work on addressing the erasure of Black women. And I said, I am completely aware of that, but I promise you eventually I'm going to arrive at a really great project. So kudos to them for believing in me. This was very general for a very long time. And then I decided, okay, if I want to address erasure, what are the different layers of erasure that I can address with one project? How many different things can I kind of break down? And I thought about a moment in history that we refer to all the time, again, not only in the United States, but globally, that we think about in terms of creating this transformational moment and how it's continued to influence us to this day, and that's the civil rights movement. It comes up over and over and over again, even in policy talks right now. There's always comparisons to the civil rights movement. But unfortunately, it's a moment in history that's spoken about from a very male kind of perspective, where men are the leaders and people can name Black male leaders of the civil rights movement, and more so than anybody else. And so I knew I was going to do something to address the erasure of women's stories within the civil rights movement, because it's so crucial to our understanding of the world to this day and will continue to be for years and years. And then I thought about roles in society that are overlooked and underappreciated and unrecognized, not given the credit that they deserve. And motherhood came to my mind really quickly. I thought about just most moms' experiences, really, even though I wasn't a mom yet, I wasn't pregnant yet, but I was aware that moms were being seen as some kind of second-class citizen, especially in the United States. Especially mothers of color were not being given supports and protections that they needed. You know, the Black maternal health crisis, etc. There are so many different ways in which you can see very clearly that Black mothers are not being respected, and therefore not being valued. And that's connected to so many other things. So then I thought, okay, that will be powerful. I haven't read a project around Black motherhood in that way. And I later, you know, in my research found more scholars who were doing this kind of work, but it felt very unique. And then finally, I wrote a list of goals for the project that I wanted. I knew I wanted it to apply beyond the academy. That's always been really important for me. It's a huge passion of mine. I'm not an academic who really loves academia. I'm actually very kind of like, whatever, it's not that big of a deal, and we should stop using all this like academic jargon that's very exclusive. I hate that. And so I knew it was going to be a book that I wanted to write a book in my PhD. That was also my goal. And I wanted it to be a trade book, meaning it would be for general audiences and it wouldn't be with academic press. So all those goals were written. I knew I wanted to celebrate Black women. I wanted us to feel seen, and I wanted others to feel like this was a journey that they could join in understanding and learning how they could create action as a result. So finally I knew mothers. So this is what I mean. It wasn't a quick moment. It was like, here's this.
Great journey. I love it.
Yeah. And so finally, and this is long story, but to finally choose these three, I did some research into moms of civil rights heroes. Of course, started with Malcolm X and MLK Jr. It's just kind of a natural,
Obviously.
you think of the
Yeah.
civil rights movement, okay, that's better. And I knew that as soon as I learned even a little bit about their moms, I was like, these women are incredible. But then I thought, I don't want to go with just two, because two makes this kind of juxtaposition of like,
You compare.
as if
Yeah.
they're opposite. Yeah, or there's like, and you're only going to focus on the differences between these two. But when you introduce a third character, it complicates things in a way that makes it really beautiful, and you get to see some similarities and some differences, and you get to just understand much more of the nuances of Black womanhood. And so I'd also recently watched I Am Not Your Negro, the documentary based off of James Baldwin's writing, and he called himself a witness to his friends' works, and he talked about his friends being Martin, Malcolm, and Medgar Evers. And I thought, that's brilliant. This is a writer. I can think about the role of arts and creativity in the civil rights movement and how a mom inspires this, especially for a queer man who has been crucial to our history. And that's when I decided on bringing in James and Burtis. And it just was, gosh, beautiful to get to know these women, and it just made sense. So it really feels like it was meant to be, but it was definitely a process. It's not like I woke up one day and said,
that's the one.
Yeah, that's the big book.
No, I feel like that's a beautiful journey, and that just shows, really deeply why it got to there, and it wasn't just a random afterthought. And I have to say, when I started reading the book, obviously we all know the three men, right, the three sons. And I felt a little bit embarrassed that I never thought about the mothers, and you think, why didn't we? Like, it seems obvious now that you've stated it, but we never think about what about their childhood, who influenced them, who was behind all of this. They were not born ready. So, what happened? And after reading the book, like, you actually feel like, you know them so much more, and that you start seeing similarities between them and my mother, for example, and myself. And it is such a beautiful journey that you make with the book, which is why I think it's amazing. But for you, it must have been so much more personal, right? Given that you were writing the book, you're doing the research, and then you got pregnant as well. So you were on the journey of motherhood. So, what, for each of the three mothers, what would you say is one thing that really stuck with you throughout?
There's so much, and it's really interesting because depending on where I was in my own life and my own personal experience, and I was developing the book, or was doing the research, or was in the editing process, whatever, I picked up on new things from each of the moms that really stuck with me. And I think that's going to be the case really for the rest of my life. I don't plan to do much more writing on the three of them, other than like opinion pieces, or maybe something for screen, and converting this to something for screen. But I have other projects in mind for other things I want to do. But still, I will always have Alberta, Burtis, and Louise on my heart and on my mind, because I did, I was expecting my son when I was in the middle of the research for the book. And at that moment, when I knew I was going to become a mother myself, or had become a mother, really, because when you're pregnant and you've conceived, it's this moment where you're like, there's a being within me, and I am now sustaining this life somehow. They were with me because of the fear that I had. That was a very real fear, not only that I think universally mothers feel of losing their children, but Black mothers especially. There are constant attacks against us, constant attacks against our children. And I started to see even more so how Alberta, Burtis, and Louise kind of transferred the work that they were already doing before they became mothers, and how it even magnified their activism when they realized, I have children, and I am fighting not only for myself and like my larger community, but these babies who I've held and nourished and carried with me. There is this kind of further moment where you transform that fear into action, and this kind of inability to accept circumstances as they are. So I felt very inspired by that my agency would not be taken away from me, despite how desperate it can feel and how hopeless it can feel when all these attacks are waged against you, and you think, oh my goodness, about my beautiful child and what's going to happen. but you participate in that change of systems. And so I felt very connected to the legacy of Black womanhood and Black motherhood. So that definitely sticks with me all the time. And then there's, of course, there are like specific little stories that I find to be really cute in all three of the stories. I love Bertus and James's relationship, that she was so accepting and so encouraging of his journey in life. You know, we have to remember they were this poor family in Harlem, had very little. He was her eldest. And so when you think even of the pressure for him of, you need to maybe make money or you need to support our family, this wasn't really something Bertus put on him. He felt that personally, but she said, you're a writer. I know you need to write. And she was a writer herself. So she sees this creative spirit in him and encourages him to write. That's not a guarantee of money. That's not a guarantee of success. So for this mother to put aside even the fact that they are struggling to make ends meet, this is her eldest son, but for her to still say, I want him to see plays and I want him to read and write. And when it's time for him to go, I'll support that no matter how sad it makes me. That's a beautiful lesson that I think all parents can carry with them. And with Louise, she was so intentional about teaching them what she wanted them to know about the world. You know, as sociologists, we think about the family being the first society and how we're teaching our kids what the world should look like and what we're modeling in the home. And Louise was so intentional about that. She was very clear about her strength in the home. When the children came back from school, she would sit there and educate them more or even re-educate them. So there's clear examples of that in the book with newspaper clippings and them sitting at the kitchen table and all of these different things. And then, of course, with Alberta, for me, it's her understanding of how you take from privilege that you might gain, but you don't see yourself as being any better than anybody else. You use that privilege to advance something larger than yourself. And so there's different ways in which I relate to all of them. And I think readers will find different parenting strategies, different moments of inspiration, and also an invitation to be our whole selves, where we also can be vulnerable and say when we're afraid or say when we're sad. I think the women also gave us examples of that.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think different people get to pick different paths that they relate with or they want to apply to their life, which makes it even more beautiful, right? And I think...
Was there anything for you that stood out between the three women's stories?
So what you mentioned about, the newspaper clippings and the teaching off to school, this is definitely something that stuck with me, because this just reminded me of also, my experience growing up with my mum. This is something that she would care a lot about doing is, yes, you can go to school, but there are also things that I want to make sure you understand, like being fair to everybody, being aware of your privilege and understanding that different people are different. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. You're not better than anyone. And I thought that was beautiful. And I really, really like that. And I think this definitely shaped me for who I am as well. And I think this is something that I've heard you talk about before, is the fact that you have a white mother, right?
I do.
How was that for you? Because for her especially, it must have been such a challenge. She must have struggled with being accepted as the mother of Black children, right?
It's interesting. I don't think my mom would have ever described it as a challenge.
Oh,
she is very she says this all the time. Even when people tried to make it a challenge, she heard weird questions depending on where we were. I think mixed families get these kinds of reactions. Hopefully it's starting to fade out, I'm a little older now, but I definitely remember when we were kids, there were people that would look at us if we were with our mom, and if our dad wasn't there, that there was some kind of confusion around a white mom and Black children. And some people would say things to her, where did you get your children, kind of thing, which was just weird generally. I don't know who feels okay asking these kinds of questions. But my mom really, for her, I don't think she would describe it as a struggle, but more so as a moment to, not a moment, because it's her whole life, but a moment to say, she's always been this kind of learning person of the world. She always is embracing of difference and thinking about, you know, how do I continue to learn, you know, and in my experiences. And so I think she saw this as a moment to continue that process where she never tried to insert herself into our shoes. She never tried to tell me what it was going to be like to be a Black woman, but instead realized and said to me, it is going to be different, but I'm always by your side, and I love you, and I know you are worthy of everything, and you're just as great as everybody else, and if not better. You know, she was there. That's another reason I haven't struggled with confidence. Both my parents have no issue.
Yeah, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I probably should have said that at the beginning, actually. But yeah, she just really walked by my side and encouraged my voice, encouraged me to speak up for what I believed in. So I think in terms of that struggle of like, was it hard for her to be the mother of Black children because she was white? I don't think she would describe that part as the struggle, but I think she would find an alignment with the mothers of Black children generally, of the struggle of seeing the fact that your children are treated differently. So it's something she understood already, because she's already somebody who I would say didn't have that sense of ignorance around race, but it's something that you can't fully prepare yourself for when, again, it's your most precious loved one. And then you can't avoid opening your eyes to how they are going to be treated differently and things people might say about them, or literal attacks that might be waged against them. You know, like my brother is like 6'5", or 6'6", actually. I'm 6 foot. Even in our presence, there's nothing that we really, we can't be hidden. You know, we're very apparent in any room that we walk into. So I definitely think maybe that part she would say, just like any mother of Black children would say, that is painful when you really realize that the world doesn't see your children in the same light that you do.
No, absolutely. And you must know the show Blackish, right?
Yeah,
we all love it. It's so funny. I absolutely love the show. And it really stuck to me when they had this episode where they talk about having the talk, where the Black families have a talk with their sons, especially what happens if a police stop you. And I think I can't believe that it is still applicable in today's time when we saw the whole George Floyd thing. And it's just not, I can't wrap my head around it. And I can't understand as a mother knowing that someone is going to look at your kids just based on the color of their skin, and they might, you know, attack them. And this is just, how do we change this? I don't even know. Like, what's your approach with this? And now you have kids as well, so you must know what this fear means. But how do we move forward? What do you think is like the most actionable steps here for us, for people like us? How do we bring about change?
And, you know, it's heartbreaking, and we've even seen it already. My son's only 17 months old, and we've had experiences where I can tell people are saying something very clearly because he is a Black boy. And, you know, for instance, here's an example. We enrolled him in swim lessons when he was like 6 months, because I love swimming. My husband doesn't know how to swim, so we both were like, these are reasons why he will swim. And he was really great at it, you know, from the beginning. And it was, you know, you could kind of tell already his like mentality around like tackling goals. Like he's very hardworking, this child is. Anyways, but he was kicking, I guess, like very vigorously. And the teacher, who was a white woman, said something like, "I'm not liking those angry kicks. He's like showing anger."
Oh my God.
And I was like, this child is 6 months old.
Oh my God.
And I don't think you would say that about somebody else.
No.
I really don't. I think you're seeing this like, you know, Black boy, and you already in your head are thinking anger. Thinking violence.
And it's okay to say that, apparently.
To his parents, like bizarre. It was so weird. So I guess, you know, for both my husband and I, we were like, you know, these are things we study. These are things we work on. We're both very social justice oriented. But when you really live it, and you're even seeing it in these small experiences, it's very, and you know, our kid is already very tall. You know, my husband's 6'1", I'm 6 foot. Like I said, he's already like bigger than kids his age. So I definitely feel this sense of, you know, oh gosh, on top of the fact that he is very strong and he is very talented and he's already very confident, what that's going to be like in school and how people are going to treat him, because they're already going in with this mindset of scary Black child, angry Black child. And again, we're very like aware of this, obviously, because this is the work that we do. But I'm grateful for that awareness, because I think we will be able to do our best, not only to prep him, but the people around us. So in terms of creating that change, I think so much of the onus, unfortunately, has been put on Black people ourselves, because we don't feel like we can control anything beyond that. You know, all we can. This is why we have the conversations with our kids, because in those experiences, we know that that other person will most likely act in an illogical way, a way that is motivated by their hatred and their bias. And so all we can say is, here's the onus on you, and here's what you can do, even if we're aware that regardless of what that child or person does, there's not much that can really save them. We've seen that multiple times. That's the terrifying part. So for me, it's more focused on what's the larger system change that we can make. I would say that my husband and I are also people who are optimists. We believe change is possible. And so we don't get stuck in the hopelessness, no matter how fearful it can be. There's even more motivation to change work and systems around us. So in the book, I speak about many different ways in which we could show that we value Black lives, by focusing first on Black motherhood and the beginning stages of Black life, where we think about universal childcare, and we think about universal basic income, and we think about ways in which dignity can be respected and there can be equity across our citizenship in the United States. And we think about, again, re-examining mass incarceration, and we think about why activists are calling to defund police and say instead, what if there were people who could help us who are not police officers? You know, police officers are not trained to be counselors. That's not their job. They don't know how to de-escalate things in the United States. That's not what they're trained to do. And so if someone's going through a mental health crisis, why aren't there other places we can call? Because there's not funding for it. So to even become, for instance, a therapist, it's really hard to do. You have to already have some kind of economic, floor, because there's all these hours you have to do unpaid. So one of my best friends is a therapist, and I didn't really understand this until she walked me through it. There's like hundreds of hours you have to do unpaid in order to get your license.
Wow.
How is somebody going to do that who doesn't already have privilege?
Exactly.
So then you have a lack of mental health experts who are representative of different communities. So these are the kind of things that we really need to focus on when we think about policy. And I talk about this in the book. If you center the stories of Black women and Black mothers, if you think about Alberta, Bertus, and Louise, you think about young Malcolm and young Martin and young James, and things that could have made their lives easier, that's what we're talking about in terms of policy. Let's change those things, because there's so much that would have been easier for these three women and for these three families, and issues that we're still facing to this day as Black mothers. The fact that I can still say our tragedies, our trials, our tribulations, that is a problem. I shouldn't still feel such a relationship between the fears that they had and what we're seeing today. So it's really an inspiration for change. I am an optimist. As much as I can see the real challenges, things can be different. And this is what Black women, I would say, have always believed. And it's the reason we're able to push things forward. It's the reason Stacey Abrams and several others in Georgia said, we're going to change our state. And others might have said, we're not ready for that. Or when Vice President Kamala Harris was running for her presidency, and everyone said, the country isn't ready for that. The country has never been ready for what Black women visualized for it. So we're just going to keep
wait
our vision.
It's ready,
of hope. Yeah. And we'll keep pushing the country forward, which is, it's a lot of pressure, of course. So there's a lot I could say about that as well. But I definitely think it's the way that we show that we're not accepting this circumstance.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that I've heard you talk about, which really stuck with me, like, this is incredible, but you know how we talk, I mean, this is something I know, is how, a lot of progress in gynecology came from experimentation done on women slaves. And this is problematic in a whole different way, obviously. But to think that we would think that now progress has been made, we view things differently. But then women like Serena Williams had issues with that. And someone like her was still not, with all the privilege that she has, she still suffered, inequality when she was asking for help, for health, when she was about to give birth. And what has been your experience of, a Black mother? What was your experience, especially like giving birth and etc.?
Yeah, I knew obviously about the Black maternal health crisis. I knew how dangerous it was. But I also, because of actually studying these three women and the work that I did around studying them, so researching, books like Revolutionary Mothering and Birthing Justice, these anthologies that if people are interested in knowing more about liberatory mothering and how Black women see our motherhood, these are books like everybody should read. It will completely change your mind, especially birthing parents. For those of us who go in knowing how dangerous it can be, it shouldn't feel like we shouldn't have so much of this like desperation and fear.
Yes.
There is an understanding of we have to like kind of break away from this as a part of our revolution, that we have to fight for good birthing experiences, because again, this is the beginning of life. And so as a gift really of my own research, I knew I wanted to work with doulas. And I knew I wanted to have, I actually wanted to work with midwives. I wanted to have a home birth originally, but where we were in Stockton, unfortunately, there weren't midwives of color around me. So this is another thing, because midwives and doulas haven't been respected as the medical professionals who they are. They've been kind of cast away from certain communities, and if you can't afford to work with them, so generally where we lived, there weren't many people who would have been able to afford it, then they're not going to be in these communities. So it's again another issue of access. So we were able to find doulas in Oakland. So that's about an hour and a half away from where we lived. But thankfully, they were willing to work with us. And so they did our training sessions with us in tandem with what I was doing at the hospital. But they came back and forth from Oakland, and they would talk to both my husband and I about the experience of pregnancy, the experience of birth. And even the first day that I met with them, they said, "Why did you want to work with doulas?" And I said, I'm really afraid of what's going to happen when I go in there. I'm well aware that anything could happen and that it's going to be out of my control, and I'm scared, and I just want somebody to be there with me. And my doula, one of my main ones, I had 3 of them. She's been doing this for like 32 years. So she said at the end, "Okay, I respect your fear. I respect that you feel this way, but I also want to tell you that you have it all wrong." She was like, "You actually are the person in control. You are the person in control." And despite what we've been told with this kind of over medicalization of pregnancy and childbirth, your body does know what to do. And so we are there to make sure your vision of your birth becomes a reality. And we will do everything in our power to make sure you are healthy and your baby is healthy and your partner is healthy. You're not in this alone either. It's not all on you, but you are the star of the show. And so I thought immediately, wow, why don't more moms hear that? That is
entirely.
It's huge. It's completely different to this like fearful, like you're running to the hospital, you don't know, and like your partner has no idea what to do, so they're just like patting you on the back. That's like not how it's supposed to be. Instead, our perspective, they said to me, was, when you're going through your contractions, think about the fact that your body is pushing, and also your baby is working. Your baby's doing work to get out of there, and then your partner is going to be right there giving you the energy that you need, because this is something you've done together. And so our moments when we have photos of the experience, when we look back at it, we're like slow dancing together. We're holding each other. My partner's holding my hands and like, grunting with me when I wanted him to. And other times, he was by my side the entire time, and my doulas were massaging me, and they were like, I could smell essential oils that were calming me. It was a team moment, which I felt, it was really hard not to take away from how difficult, insane it is. Like, you're like, I'm breaking and I don't, how am I going to survive this? But because they were all there believing in me, I had the most beautiful birthing experience, everything that I wanted. It was powerful. And I was able to avoid, I'm blessed to be able to say that, this moment of like, but had my doulas not been there, it would have been completely different. I'm being completely honest. I would have gone in and probably been treated very differently. And there's nothing wrong with any birthing experience. If you get the epidural, great. If you get the C-section, great. Mothers are incredible. I'm not in any way saying one is better than the other. What I wanted for myself was a vaginal birth. I didn't want to be medicated in any way. And had they not been there with me, I know I would have asked for those things because I was afraid.
Yeah. It's just the fear gets too real then.
Yeah, you have no idea. It's like, whoa. Things I couldn't have even prepped myself for. I was really like, I had moments where I was like, I don't know, I can't do this. They were like, yes, you can do this. And I was like, okay, I guess I can. But again, had they not been there, had they not been there, I would have been like, no, I'm done.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's really beautiful. And now we will do it again, and you will go in with a lot less fear again. So that's really good.
Yeah, and we will see. And I mean, you definitely still have to be flexible. You never know what can happen. I am grateful for medicine. I'm grateful for when it's needed. But the problem, unfortunately, is that it's been overused, and especially on Black women's bodies. So unfortunately, people don't want to admit this, but things like, we need to know, C-sections, hospitals make more money off of C-sections than they do off of vaginal births. So they actually encourage them without really meaning to sometimes. So if a mother is, maybe it's a little too early actually for a mom to go to the hospital, and she probably should have taken a little more time to labor at home. The earlier you go to the hospital, the more likely you are to get a C-section. You are pushing for a long time. You're tired. You're not in your home environment. People aren't letting you eat or like letting you relax. You have to lay down the entire time. Everyone keeps telling you to like get in the bed, and that's really not like a very natural way of giving birth. Most people, you're like moving around. You're like trying to like get in the most comfortable position. It's not like I'm just laying in bed for, my labor was 15 hours long.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm not going to be like laying there for 15 hours. But yeah, so it's just different things like that where unfortunately C-sections are also performed on women of color much more than our white counterparts. So we have to be able to admit there's a lot of strategy behind this without passing judgment on different birthing experiences, but also being able to say, that's actually really not how it was supposed to go, unless there was an emergency. And sometimes it just was sort of like, it was encouraged and the mother was completely unaware of all the things she was being given.
That's the problem, right? Like there are some moments where you just don't know what's right or wrong, and whatever is being shouted at you, you're like, okay, let's just do that. And God.
And the last thing I'll say about it, because I'm going on and on about this, but obviously I care deeply about motherhood, is this notion that there was a transition really in history where women were told, doctors, and mostly white male doctors, know more about this than you do. So this was the revolutionary moment in my experience when my doula said, you are in control. You are the star of the show. Your body knows what to do. That was huge, because what women have been told in, culture, whether that's, through movies or when you have your first meeting with your doctor, etc., it's the opposite. It's, I'm the medical professional. I know what's best for you. I know what to do. So when I say, maybe you should get the epidural, or maybe we should schedule a C-section, or maybe you should be induced, you then think, well, I'm not the one who knows, so you'll do whatever, versus this reverse in your mindset where you say, no, I know what I want. And unfortunately, most women don't feel that way when they go in.
Which I understand, and it's not just health, right? In many aspects of our lives, we just think, oh, but these people know better, they're the professional, but that's not the case anymore. And I think it's time we understood that. But as you're saying that, Black women especially, they have always been treated unfairly in medicine and different things. But also when you look at history, every time there was economic crisis or any kind of problems, Black women are the ones who take the hardest hit. And even now, you know, with the pandemic, which you think things must have changed, but when we look at the data of, they're just saying, oh, a lot of women have lost their jobs. But when you look at the actual statistics, it's women of color are losing their jobs, not just women. And I think if you put that into perspective, it kind of raises the question as to why women of color. And I've actually done a lot of research on this when it comes to also, you know, progression in the workplace. It's usually you see that they just say that, oh yeah, there are not a lot of black women that progress, but that might be a lack of interest. It might be that they're interested in their family life more. But then there's also data that shows interest, and you see the interest is always high, but the proportion does not reflect that when they're actually moving up. So, but again, like, I don't know why I'm saying this to you. This is not going, I don't expect you to have the answer to this, but it's just frustrating. And then when you keep reading about this as us women of colors who are now, you know, growing up and trying to make the society into a better place, but then how do you go about this? And then you hear things, for example, in the news about Meghan Markle. Have you watched the interview?
I have, of course.
What
yeah.
did you think? I was so emotional in parts of it, and I find it really revolting when people are saying that, oh, she's just looking for attention, or they say that, oh, someone with privilege is crying about the fact that their kid is not being called the prince. But I was like, yeah, but this one person had one interview of 1 hour, and everyone is talking about, you know, colorism now. Everyone is talking about how, oh, maybe the royal family is a bit racist, but when you and I will talk about it,
maybe.
Yeah, you and I will talk about it, no one will listen. So I think she used her privilege very well to raise this very important question. But how did you feel about when she mentioned this bit about, you know, the fact that they asked about the skin color of her son? Like, what did you think?
Oh gosh, I have so much to say about all the brilliance that you just shared. I mean, yes, first, exhausting that continuously we're told Black women or women of color, you're not succeeding because you. Yeah. It's you. It is you. And, you know, like, feel empowered, do more. No. This is not on us. Thank you very much. There's several different layers of, again, policy. There are all these attacks that are being waged against us. And another thing I was trying to accomplish with the book is, like, no, dehumanization happens day in and day out. We're not exaggerating. We're not being dramatic. This is how it happens. Here are examples. So this is how we address it. I think once we're able to call the thing what it is, then we're more likely to be able to fix it. And then in terms of with Meghan, it was interesting because I'm a fan. I was so inspired by what she was able to do. But I also definitely think it's important to realize that, like, it made her story even more sincere because, in my opinion, neither her or Harry had, like, very developed understandings of race, honestly. And I think that she felt really, maybe even subconsciously, that she was going to be fine. You know, she's like light skin. She never calls herself a Black woman either. She always says mixed race. So this is, like, also interesting. So I don't think she was expecting to be treated with anti-Blackness. I think she was expecting it to be sort of like fine, you know, and I think her and Harry would have been happy if they had been treated as, you know, was it Duke and Duchess? I think that was their title. But when they realized that anti-Blackness was a thing, they were almost forced to be more revolutionary than they intended to be. So I think it makes it even clearer, you know, it's even for those that aren't intending to come in and change the whole system, they're victims of anti-Blackness and this kind of racist treatment.
But yeah, okay. Final question for you, you know, what has been the highlight throughout this journey? I know that you saw your books on Times Square and you got to hold your first printed copy of the book, but what was the biggest highlight?
Oh, goodness. I feel like it's still continuing, this highlight of just being on the journey of having my book out there. It's so cool because the book is just in the hands of so many who I don't know. So it's just crazy that it's taking on this life of its own, you know, to, have been an Amazon bestseller already, to see again, like on the billboard, like you said, we've already sold, I think, like 12,000 copies of the book, which is crazy. Gosh, and I'm a very goal-oriented person, so I very much, like, as much as I am very like check, okay, we've done these things and now my next goal is, you know, I'm also trying to just embrace what has happened so far and be really proud and excited about it, because unfortunately there's so many books that come out every year that are really amazing and just don't get the fanfare that they deserve, especially when they're highlighting women of color. They might not have had the backing that they needed. Maybe their publisher didn't value the book in the way that it required. And I just think I'm grateful generally that the book has received such recognition so far. And it's a long journey, though, a book tour. I didn't realize. I thought it was just sort of maybe like, the first and second month, but it's like this long term. And then like after a year, the paperback edition comes out and you do it all over again. So that's really fun. I think I'm just embracing each conversation and each moment and loving it. I love every minute of it.
Well, thank you so much for taking us on the journey. And I can't wait for the next book. And thank you for being here today. Congratulations on a very successful book. And if you're ever back in Cambridge, we should definitely grab a cup of coffee.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that so much. And thank you for this podcast. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I'm just excited that we're connected now.
Me too. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, I did. I loved it.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you, Anna.
Thank you.